you turn into an angel.
You are happy, you don't feel any pain anymore.
I think there isn't a heaven or a hell, but I do think there is an afterlife.
But as I've grown older, haven't really thought of any other idea of just utter darkness.
As a little girl, I believed that you would go to heaven, and as I've got older, I still believe those things.
I think that when you die, you go up to heaven and you see all your family members.
I'd like to think that I will go to heaven and be reacquainted with people that I've lost, and I hope it would be a better place.
I really think that when you die, you go back and meet your parents, and everybody you've lost in life, you start again.
I have come to believe that human beings have a need for faith and the need to feel that there's some essence of us that does go on after we've died.
When people do pass, I think that they are still around. They send sort of signs to you.
Heaven is a lovely place.
You're with all the people that you have lost over the years.
Life on earth is hard, as we know. We have to work very hard for anything we get. So when you die, it should be a peaceful place.
But as you lose more people in life, then you realise that's what happens to us all, unfortunately. Nothing we can do about it. But I still do believe that something happens to us all, and something nice will happen to us all at the end.
One of the key components to a happy, thriving life is to have a clear sense of meaning and purpose. And so sometimes, not always, but sometimes my work is to help people discover their sense of meaning and purpose. And for me personally, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense, or I couldn't make sense of the universe the way I experience it if everything just comes to a dead stop when you die. So that's part of my belief, is that having looked at all of the different ways of trying to make sense of it, the one that is the simplest and resonates most is one that says that we are spiritual beings having a human existence.
I grew up an only child in Ireland, living in the middle of the woods where I saw the spirits and the fairies and all of those things, highly imaginative child. My parents wanted me to do something professional, so I did agriculture and left university at the age of 21 and hated every minute of the agriculture bit. It just wasn't me. Then I got married, had 5 sons and was very busy doing all of that. And about 40 years ago, I had a very serious nervous breakdown, very depressed, and I decided I wanted to be me, who I really am. And I thought, well, what's that? So I thought, I want to help people. I want to help people to have a better life. And I wanted to get in touch more with my own spirituality, my understanding of the non-physical realm of life, and to be able to help people through that. Curiously enough, apart from the work I do, I love science. I just love it. And I love quantum physics. Not that I know a lot about it, but I study a lot of those things. And my understanding is that consciousness existed before matter. And consciousness came into matter. And our consciousness is our individual soul, spirit, whatever word you like to use, that comes into a physical body to do whatever needs to be done, to learn, to grow. And we leave it when we've finished. I say to my sons, I want you all to celebrate my graduation when I leave my body. But I've met people from all over the world, as you can imagine, of all religions, all denominations, and the majority of them have a belief in something in the line of life after death. And others are searching. You know, I work in Hong Kong a lot, and I get the bankers and the investment people there, and they come in kind of, you know, wondering and saying, I've got all this money and I'm doing really well, but there's got to be more to life than all of this. And they're looking for something. So I think most people are searching for something, and most people know intuitively that they are not just their physical body, that there is something much more to it all.
I was brought up in a very fundamentalist Christian home, which had quite an effect on me in turning me off spiritual things. Although I found that there was, through music, which is a great interest of mine, there was a contact with spiritual things. But in terms of churches and the like, I really was quite turned off. And I had a career in the international world of banking, and I lived and worked in a number of countries around the world. And I suppose you would say that I was very attuned to the materialistic world through my career, which was full of ambition. And although from time to time one had setbacks, the ambition was always there. It was a moment which was and remains very special to me when I was working in Paris, and I went to the Basilica of the Sacré-Cœur, the Sacred Heart, up near Montmartre, and I went into there as intending to be a tourist and to look at the Basilica and go round it and so on. But it seemed that there was a power greater than myself that led me straight down the aisle till I got halfway down and sat me down, and just then encompassed me with a whole sense of power, of energy. And it's something one can't really explain because it's a very personal experience. But it was, if you like, a kick up the backside to me for a power greater than myself to say to me, I am here and what are you going to do about it? I then began a search because I was looking for an answer. Where was this power? Where was this energy? And it wasn't until I came into touch with a spiritualist organisation that I felt I had come home. And at the time I was living in Essex, and I found myself being introduced to a healing sanctuary, a sanctuary where people did spiritual healing. But also it was a place where mediums worked. And indeed the healing was a form of mediumship as it was introduced to me. And so that's where it really started, in that healing sanctuary. In the very first seminar I ever went to, which was a practical one about mediumship, and there was quite a large group that went into the seminar, and we were divided into those that were new and those that were accomplished mediums, and then we were married together with a medium and myself. And the first exercise we were asked to do had to do with having an object given to you by your partner and to connect somehow in a psychic way with that object and who had had it, and to describe the person that you felt. It was a purely psychic exercise. And I was hopeless. And the leader recognized straight away that I was hopeless and I was getting nothing. And she stood behind me and she said, well, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to sense that there is someone close to you. Can you do that? And can you tell me if it's a man or a woman? Can you sense it with your feelings? And this was quite foreign to me, but nevertheless I did sense that I had someone of a female quality around me. And she led me through a number of steps, at the end of which the lady opposite me, the experienced medium, said, "You have my grandmother with you."
I used to work as a nurse in intensive care, and it was very early on in my nursing career then that I was looking after a patient who was clearly dying, and that night shift changed everything for me, because I just literally touched the bed to put it down, and the man was in so much pain he nearly jumped out of bed in agony, and our eyes connected, and it felt like I'd swapped places with him, and I could understand what he was going through. And it just made me think, what am I doing? I'm not being of service to this patient at all. I'm, you know, just contributing to a really unpleasant, prolonged suffering death. And I couldn't stop thinking about it, and that's what changed everything for me. So I started reading about death, and then lots of different synchronicities happened, and in the end I just thought, well, I'm working in the perfect place. Why don't I do my own research study into near-death experiences? And that's what happened, and I started researching near-death experiences once I'd got the approval of the ethics committee and all the red tape and everything. And for 5 years then I interviewed patients who had survived their admission to the intensive care unit, and then it took me a further 3 years then to analyse the data and to write it up. And at the end of it then I was awarded a PhD. The strongest case was the case of patient 10, which I've now published back in 2006. And this case history, I was looking after the man at the time that it happened, and we were sitting him in the chair because he was making a very good recovery. He was still ventilated, and to cut a very long story short, his condition rapidly deteriorated when he was sitting in the chair. So we got him back into bed, by which point he was deeply unconscious. He wasn't responding to deep painful stimuli or us calling his name or anything at all. The doctor came and examined him. His blood pressure had dropped. We gave him some fluid for the blood pressure. It resolved temporarily. Another doctor came then and reviewed him, and he shone a pupil torch in his eyes to check that his pupils were reacting. The physiotherapist, in the meantime, she'd helped to sit him in the chair. She was concerned. She was poking her head around the curtains to check on his condition. When his condition had stabilised, I then cleaned his mouth with a pink lollipop sponge and suctioned away all the secretions that were there. And then after about half an hour, he started to regain neurological functioning because his eyelids were flickering and he was moving his all 4 limbs. And then it was about 4 hours later and he regained full consciousness. And when he regained full consciousness, he became very not very excited about something, you know. So he was trying to talk, but he couldn't because he had a tracheostomy. So the physiotherapist got a letterboard and he spelled, "I died and I watched it all from above." And so the doctors were there at the time and they said, "You better tell Penny about that." But the doctors did take notice of it, and they documented in his notes that he had actually regained consciousness and described a near-death experience. And then when I interviewed this man in depth, he described that he had left his body. He was looking down on the emergency situation from above, and he correctly identified which doctor had examined him, although that doctor hadn't been present prior to him losing consciousness. He also correctly said what the physiotherapist did, poking her head around the curtains, and he also described my actions of cleaning his mouth. And at that point, he was deeply unconscious and not responding to deep, painful stimuli. But he actually described a heightened state of reality, and he went upwards then into a pink room, and in that pink room, he said there was a man, and he said, "I'm not sure who this man was. He could have been Jesus, but it's not what I would expect Jesus to look like, because he had long, scruffy hair that needed to be combed." And also next to Jesus, there was a man who was his father, and he said, "My father was there, and he was calling me and beckoning me to come to him." And there was also another lady there who he'd never met. It was his deceased mother-in-law, but he recognised her from photos. And he said, "I was so happy there. All my pain had disappeared, and I just wanted to stay there." But the Jesus figure said, "No, it's not your time, you have to go back." And as soon as he said that, he said, "It's as if I was sucked backwards," and he faded backwards. The image faded in front of his eyes, and he was back in his body. And he said, "As soon as I was back in my body, I was in tremendous pain." And he said, "It was so painful, I wished that I was dead." So a further thing to this as well, which I picked up again on it more of an in-depth interview, I said to him, "When you were out of your body, were there things that you can do that you can't normally do?" Now by that, some people say that sometimes if they can think of a location, say the pyramids of Egypt, they'll find themselves there. So that's what I was getting at. But he just held up his hand and he said, "Oh look," he said, "I can open up my hand." Now at the time I didn't realise the significance of this, but this man has cerebral palsy. So at the time this experience happened, he was 60 years of age, and his hand had previously been in a permanently contracted position like this. But now after his experience, he can now open it out fully. Now when I told the doctors and the physios about this, they said physiologically that shouldn't be possible because the tendons would be in a permanently contracted position. So to release, to open out his hand, those tendons would have to be released. Now I checked on his notes just to see if he'd had extensive hand physiotherapy. He hadn't, no operation or anything had been done. So that is something that we can't explain. Now to me, that is fascinating because if we understood the mechanism behind that, how many millions of people out there have got similar ailments, and perhaps we could rectify those without surgery if we understood that mechanism. So I think these cases bring up so much that we don't understand, and I think it's really important that we investigate them further.
I'm having this procedure done 1 minute, and I remember seeing it on the screen and getting a bit tired, and then the next minute it's like somebody pushed your ears in. They pushed, so it's like a muffled. I could hear everybody talking. They weren't running around, they weren't panicking. It was very calm, very, very calm. The colour of the room, everything, there wasn't a colour, it was sepia. But the white overtook the sepia dark colours. It was very bright. I looked around, I could see everything that was going on, like you're watching telly. And my sister is stood with her hands behind her back, legs crossed, near the door that you get wheeled in, just smiling, but she looked so healthy, obviously a lot healthier as I remember her, not when how she was at the end. She wasn't worried, which didn't give me any reason to worry, but I didn't feel worried, I just felt so calm. I remember saying to the nurse, "Where's my sister?" Because I'd seen her it felt so real. It felt like, she said, you haven't come with your sister. And there was no way that she could know what I was saying. I think she just thought I was still away with the fairies because I was so sedated. You're so confused. But yeah, it was an extraordinary feeling, something that I've never felt, and I would love to feel again if I passed away, but yeah, it was so calm. For me, it's just proven that there is something there, and she is with me, always with me.
I think a lot of people are scared of dying and scared of being around somebody dying, but I've never found it a scary experience. Sometimes it's felt strange because it's a very busy time. If you're in hospital and people are trying to stop somebody from dying, then it can be a terrible rush, and then it's a very quiet time after that. So that's one of the experiences I've had. But then working with care of the elderly, they're more expected to die. So there isn't always that rush around, and there's time just to be with them and just to be with them while they're being peaceful. And in fact, I do remember an old lady saying to me, she said something and I said, pardon? And I worked out that what she was saying is, I'm dying. And there was nothing for me to do apart from just stay with her as she slipped away. And so she obviously knew at that moment that she was about to die. I think most people do accept it, unless it's a sudden death. But I think if people have been ill, or they're very old and things are just winding up, I think there is an acceptance, and it's almost like a gentle surprise, I think, is that I'm dying. It's not a fear, it's nothing. I've never seen a fear of death. I've been lucky enough to always see people slipping away.
She was sort of there, but she was asleep, but we were all talking to her, and I was holding her hand, and I just said, Mum, I love you, thank you very much for being my mum, and that made everybody cry even more, but I wanted to say that, and she started to cry. Tears just rolled down her face, and then she just gave a sigh and just went dead on 10 o'clock, very, very peacefully. She just went. You know, the machine stopped and that was it. But she knew, because we all told her we loved her. Everyone spoke to her, said how they felt, and then she died. And then she came to visit me in September. We had a conversation. She said, I'm really sorry I went so quick. I love you very much. And she's free from pain and she's very happy. And she's with her family. So that might tell you that we do meet someone, because her mum and dad and her sister was there.
Well, when people come back after a near-death experience, one of the biggest transformations that they go through is that they have absolutely no fear of death at all. And several of the patients I've looked after have said, I've died before, you know, I know what to expect. I know I've experienced it and it was beautiful. It was really something pleasant. So when it's my time, so they're not saying that they want to die now, but they know that when it's their time and it's ready, they'll be ready to go, and they're not afraid of it at all. They say it's such a peaceful and pleasant and lovely experience.
Future life regression began with a lady called Anne Gersh, and she is the founder of Future Life Progression, and she used to do group regression. She used to do past life regression with the military, with groups, and the groups all used to see the same thing when they did a regression together, and they discovered that they'd all incarnated in different lifetimes together. So that in itself was very interesting. And then there was this one occasion when they saw something that they didn't understand, and they saw this terrible accident, and they saw these two buildings and they saw all this smoke and they didn't understand it. And then 3 weeks later, the 9/11 happened with the Twin Towers. So so they were really amazed, and they really knew they were onto something. Because of all the studies that I've done, and because of my own kind of spiritual experiences, I have come to see that the nature of reality is dreamlike, and that this reality is a dream. And even quantum physics is kind of showing that you can't really, you can't detach this experience from consciousness, and that matter isn't as solid as we think it is. And so it's really like everything is being dreamed into existence, everything is a story. So if we can be here in this lifetime, we can be here in other lifetimes. And so I find that it's really comforting to know that there are other lives, because, you know, if everything's going wrong for you in this lifetime, it's a bit sort of grim, isn't it? So to be able to feel that this is just one experience is a really amazing thing.
Somebody who had irritable bowel, and they'd suffered with it for 20 years, didn't understand why they continued to have it, because they'd been to dietitians, they'd been to doctors, they'd done everything they possibly could, changed their diet several times, got rid of any irritant in their diet that might be aggravating an underlying condition, did everything in their power to get rid of this IBS that was plaguing them, and found that no matter what they did, it didn't seem to matter. And so we suggested a past life experience to see if anything would point a finger at the underlying cause. So the person went into the regression, and what transpired is that they had been a soldier on the battlefield, and they'd been run through with a pike from behind, which had gone right through their bowel and out the other side. And in the remembering of that death scenario, and the working with the issues that it brought up, and being able to resolve those issues, the person found that their IBS mysteriously vanished and never appeared again. Half the world believes in reincarnation, and that would be any faith that has a root in Hinduism. Religions that have a root in Judaism wouldn't, because that's not reported within their sacred writings and so on. I think that rebirth is difficult to explain to somebody who doesn't have the concept to start with. And that's one of the reasons why past life regression was effective, because it was in the doing of it that the understanding of it comes. I'm a scientist fundamentally, so I've approached this from a science point of view. And if you understand the principle within quantum theory, that energy is. Energy doesn't die, it can't. Energy is a constant, but what happens at the end of life is that the energy transmutes into another form. So what is the bit that we leave behind at death? And that surely has to be the physicality of the body. And so many people's concept of death is focusing on the deterioration of the corpse after death and all of that sort of thing. And that's the transient part. But the constant energy, in other words, the consciousness of the living being lives on. And it will live on in a different form, but it does live on.
We have a choice to do our very best moment to moment and keep evolving for the good of our highest well-being, our own soul journey, and everyone else's soul journey around us. When we leave this form, that choice continues. It's a continuous process. So when we go out of this form, our soul continues to choose what is the best next thing to happen.
My daughter-in-law died 4 years ago, and she didn't believe in life after death, and my son didn't believe in life after death. And I desperately wanted to get in touch with Mandy, that was her name, and I couldn't, it didn't happen. I think I was trying too hard. And then one day I was in a very relaxed state, and there she was in front of me. And she said, "I'm in a place where I am not dead." Now that would not have been my vocabulary, so I knew it was very real. She was there. I haven't seen her since, but I only needed that one experience. It was just lovely to know that she now knows. She now knows. I believe that consciousness, which is another word for our spirit or our soul, leaves the body and goes to another frequency, another vibration. You know, some religious people call it heaven, nirvana, well, I don't know, different names, but I believe we go to another frequency. And I think that frequency depends very much on our state of consciousness through most of our lives, really. That we go on to a higher frequency if we're actually operating on a high frequency during our lifetime while we're in the body. If we're on a low frequency during our lifetime, we probably have to go through some intermediate state or stage. And there's so many books written about it now from people's actual experience. But my belief is that we just leave our body. And I believe we leave it with a sigh of relief. And I've had this from so many people, I hate to say dead people, people who've left their bodies, people who are not in physical reality anymore. They've told me that when they left with a, "Oh, thank God that's over." So we fear death. Most people fear death, particularly in the English society. In other cultures, it's not exactly celebrated, but it's honoured, respected. But in the English culture, there's a real fear around it. And yet I think it can be a very joyful experience.
I grew up around death and dying. My father was a funeral director in the States for 35 years, and he's now retired. However, I certainly just grew up around death and dying in a way that most people don't, and so I think because of that it gave me a certain exposure and way of thinking around death and dying. That's been very helpful. Some of my earliest memories of childhood are dead bodies. It was just because we never lived in a funeral home, but we were around the funeral home. And that was just, it was completely normal. It was completely normal in the way that you just grow up with what your dad does as being a normal kind of thing. There was nothing weird or strange about it. It was just a job. And so in many ways, I didn't grow up with any of the sort of fears or concerns around either anything about, say, the idea of being dead, but also in terms of death or what happens after death. It was just a very everyday experience. Well, in terms of the physical level, I know what happens. We begin to decompose. I mean, that is just the reality situation. In terms of the spiritual level, I mean, I'm a non-believer, so I don't have any. I have no investment in a kind of afterlife or any points along that way. So I'm fine with that. I'm also fine with decomposition. I mean, I think decomposition is one of the great things about organic biological materials that we break down. And I think that's actually very productive, because if we didn't, we'd have a real problem, because we'd have lots and lots of dead bodies around all the time. But we do break down, and there's ways that I think that is actually itself very productive. So as far as I'm concerned, when I die, I'm a dead body, and I don't expect much else to happen. Now, other people have lots of other expectations, and that's fine too. I mean, I respect that.
I think the main way of getting through to people is they love their animals, and when I connect to an animal in spirit, they know their animals back to front. And when you give them information that absolutely is classically their animal, one, you're proving their animal is in spirit, but secondly, there is a spirit life. And the other thing is that if you give information that they don't know that comes up, that only goes to show the only person who can tell you was the animal. An example of that is talking to a lady's cat, told me some wonderful funny stuff, and then I could see him looking through a glass roof. So I said to her, have you got a conservatory? And she said, no. Again, as spirit do, they will repeat things. I said, he showed me looking through a glass roof. And she said, I don't know. So I said, note it, I don't know what it is. And a couple of weeks later, I got an email from her saying, oh, I was going along the road the other day and one of the neighbours said, oh, haven't seen your cat for a couple of weeks. Is he okay? And she said, no, he died. They said, oh, we'll miss him. Do you know, he used to sit on our conservatory roof and stare through at us. Which absolutely lightened her heart. She knew absolutely categorically that he was alive in spirit, but also it was proof that he was the only person that could have told me that. I got this picture, but he'd shown me it, and he said it's like he'd look, I don't know why, but he looked so cute. It's like you could sit him in a basket on a bicycle. So I don't know if you understand why he'd show me that.
Because when he was in The Wizard of Oz, he was in the witch's bicycle.
Oh, was he?
Yes.
Oh,
Dorothy's bicycle.
Dorothy's
bicycle going around.
Oh wow! Because
Yes,
it just floated into my head, and I was thinking, oh, that's cute.
Yes,
oh
when
right.
he was on stage. Yes.
Oh, bless you.
Yes.
Well done. Animals on Earth talk to each other. Even spirit animals will talk to animals on Earth. It's amazing. But these were living animals, and what happened was, again in a conversation, I always say it's a three-way conversation, and this horse said to me, am I up for sale? And I was like, oops, I don't know. So I said to the owner, be careful, the horse is listening, is she up for sale? And the owner went, yes, but I haven't said anything. And with that, I saw a black dog. And I said to her, have you got a black dog? And she went, yes. I thought, ooh, guess who told the horse? So you can just picture it just running out the house going, you're up for sale. So yes, they do chat, and they will also tell tales on each other. They're like kids sometimes. So it is funny. And I can remember a defining moment. I went to visit a friend, as my artist friend, and I went to visit her, and her husband was a little bit skeptical about what I did. And her father, who was very elderly at that point, was sitting there. And she said to me, oh, will you talk to my horse? So she handed me a photograph of a horse called Irish who'd passed years ago. And I told her a few bits and pieces, and then it just came, I just said, oh, can I shake your hand? So I put my hand out, and I went like that and shook her hand, and she burst into tears. And she said, when I used to go in the stable, he would lift his leg and shake hands. And from that moment, she knew it was real. Her husband knew it was real, but her father then knew it was real as well. And every time I visited, he would say to me, you know, how's the spirit world? And I say, alive and kicking, John, alive and kicking. And since he's gone to heaven, that he's communicated with his wife. And I just think that is beautiful. And it took his fear away.
I can't remember a time when I wasn't fascinated and knew I was going to die, even as a child, which was a bit weird for my parents, but it was just so part of my understanding about who I was as a person growing up into being an adult. And I trained as a nurse when I was 18, and so that's when I first rubbed up against actually seeing somebody dying and being with them when they died and laying out their bodies. And that, after a long, long journey, sort of led me into studying more about it, and I never lost my fascination for it, even though I stopped nursing. But eventually it led me to doing an MA in the Rhetoric and Rituals of Death. My passion in life is to help people to talk more openly and honestly about end-of-life issues. $10,000 now have been run across the world. And if you want to find a Death Café in your area, you just go onto the Death Café website, and that's where everybody publishes Death Cafés, who runs them. So I've run about 50 now. I started about 4 years ago, and I I call them pop-up death cafes. So I used to pop up my narrowboat and run death cafes there, and now I'm popping up in my garden shed and running death cafes from here. It's extraordinary who turns up at these death cafes. The youngest person's been 18 and the oldest I've had is 82. So the conversations are so varied, but a theme often arises, which is often centres around what happens, because a lot of people have sat beside people who are dying and have found it the most extraordinary, liberating experience for them. It often, to be sitting with somebody, often people, it really helps their grieving process, because they see what's happened and they have the opportunity to say goodbye. But often they talk about very strange things that have happened, like the person who's dying they'll say, well, they sort of talked about seeing somebody or hearing children or something weird happened in the room and I don't know what that is. And so they'll often talk about end-of-life experiences, which I would explain as end-of-life experiences. But what's so wonderful about these cafes is everything's permitted. And nobody closes anybody else down. It's really about offering that space to explore your experience of what it's like to either be with somebody dying. Some people actually come because they've had a terminal diagnosis and they want to come and talk about that without fear of somebody saying, oh, don't talk about that, or it just gives people permission to say what they want to say in any way they want to say it. I believe that love calls us. We are definitely, love plays such a role in our life from the time we're born. It's either absent or it's present or it's always there. People are always searching for love. And my experience of talking to lots of people about end-of-life experiences, to people who are dying, to the medical staff that look after people, to the relatives who experience sitting with people who are dying. Love is present, and it plays a part in such an extraordinary way. It could be that somebody who's dying is unconscious, but they somehow defy medical science by waiting for that much loved person to walk into the door, and then they may never even regain consciousness, but it's almost like that's where they suddenly go, oh, I can die now. Love is present. It's extraordinary. It may be that they want to resolve issues with people. And that's all about love.
Belief is an interesting word, because as soon as you believe something, it means you've stopped looking. You've taken it for granted. So I try not to believe too much. I question things, and the sense that I make of my own existence and the people that I've been close to and the people I work with is that there is some continuity. But it's not continuity that we would necessarily recognize. We're not the same being in spirit as we are in this three-dimensional up, down, left, right world. So I suspect, let's put it that way, that there is something eternal about our existence. We come into existence for a lifetime in order to grow in a particular way. And the big question is, what is the purpose for this particular journey? And because if we can answer that and find the thing that we can do uniquely and better than anyone else and express that and share it with the world, then we have a good life.
We're all energy, we're made of energy, and as science has proved, energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it just changes form. And I think my nursing experience, coupled with my studies as well, has made me think there's got to be something more. And if you think about the way in which the process of death itself, as someone is dying, now I've been with thousands of patients as they've been dying, And even right up until the point where they're about to die, there is something that's animating that body, even if they're unconscious. And then suddenly they've died and you look back at that body and it's totally different. It is just literally like a shell. And there's such a contrast in the minutes leading up to death and the minutes after death. And so I think, you know, my nursing experience coupled with my studies has given me a very different perspective on consciousness and what consciousness is. And we've always been led to believe that consciousness is produced by the brain. But now, as a result of my studies, I think that consciousness is primary and it's mediated through the brain, but not created by the brain. And I think that there's times in our life when the brain always acts like a filter and it screens out the true nature of this consciousness. But there are times in our life that the filter action of the brain relaxes a bit and it allows this heightened state of consciousness into our everyday reality. And as people are dying, it seems that that filter action becomes completely relaxed and that higher state of consciousness is then experienced as people are dying, because many people as they are dying start to see dead relatives who have gone on before them, and they have these conversations with people I've not been able to see at the bedside, but clearly these people are having these conversations and they're getting great comfort from it as well.
I can't speak for anybody else, but it's important for me to know that this life that I live is not the be-all and end-all of everything. And everything tells me that it can't possibly be. There has to be more to it than that. And the more I work, and the longer I work as a medium, the more convinced I am. The evidence that I am given that can give to a person which will say to me afterwards, that was definitely my granny, or that was definitely my mother. And I had the very same thing happen to me with my father communicating with me. It makes my life full of purpose now, that understanding. First of all, I have no fear of moving from this world into the next, because I think it's going to be an exciting experience from everything I have learnt from those who communicate. So I have no fear of passing from this world to the next. But equally, I believe that it can give you, if you're not worrying about what's going to happen, you can get on with life and be far more fulfilling in what you do and what you can achieve, because you're not wasting your time worrying about death.